What happens when the hunter becomes the hunted? When the same cold, calculated weapon once unleashed on others suddenly turns against its own master? That is exactly what Russia is facing right now. For years, Vladimir Putin turned winter itself into a weapon, not a metaphor, but a ruthless, tangible instrument of war. He believed frost and darkness could do what tanks and missiles could not: break the will of a nation. In the winter campaigns of this brutal conflict, he sought to freeze Ukraine into submission, extinguish its lights, and plunge millions into despair. As reported by multiple Western agencies, by mid-2024, Ukraine had lost 1/3 of its pre-war electricity capacity, while reconstruction costs soared beyond $68 billion. To the Kremlin, that was victory, silent, cold, and merciless. But in October 2025, this arrogance reached its peak. On the 3rd of October, the Russian military launched 381 drones and 35 missiles toward Ukraine's energy grid, targeting key facilities in Kharkiv and Pava. The result was catastrophic. Entire regions, Sumy and Chuhuiv, were thrown into darkness, tens of thousands left without heat water or communication. Russia's defense ministry proudly claimed all military targets were hit, yet to the world it sounded more like a confession of terror. That night, in the quiet homes of Kharkiv and across Ukraine, families huddled under candlelight. Mothers whispered to children that the lights would return soon. They didn't know that something far greater was about to ignite, not in Ukraine, but inside Russia itself. As analysts from Reuters and Deutsche Welle later noted Putin's belief in Russian invulnerability, the idea that his homeland was a fortress shielded from retaliation was his greatest illusion. The Kremlin's propaganda had convinced citizens that war existed only on TV screens hundreds of kilometers away. But as the saying goes, every empire built on lies eventually collapses under the weight of its own shadow. On October 5th, just 2 days after that massive Russian assault, Ukraine struck back, harder than ever before. A coordinated wave of more than 250 drones and missiles crossed into Russian airspace, hammering 7 different regions, including Belgorod and Bryansk, the same areas feeding Moscow's war machine. The strikes were precise, devastating, and symbolic. For the first time since the full-scale invasion began, Russians would feel what millions of Ukrainians had endured: the sound of drones overhead, the sky lit by fire, and the sudden chilling realization that their own cities were no longer safe. The Kremlin had used winter to terrorize its neighbor. Now that same darkness was coming home. The question was no longer how much pain Russia could inflict, but how much chaos it could endure. And as the fires began to spread across Belgorod, one truth became undeniable: the war was no longer in Ukraine. It had come to Russia itself. It was the night of October 5th, 2025, a night that shattered the illusion of safety inside Russia. As most citizens of Belgorod slept, the first wave of Ukrainian drones swept through the sky like a storm of silent thunder. Within minutes, air raid sirens screamed across 7 Russian regions. People woke to the terrifying glow of explosions on the horizon. For millions, it was the first time war had entered their living rooms. According to Reuters and Defense News, Ukraine launched more than 250 drones and a series of precision-guided missiles in a massive counterstrike against Russia's energy infrastructure. These were not random acts of vengeance. They were meticulously calculated blows aimed at the very arteries that powered Russia's war machine. The strikes focused on 2 key regions, Bryansk and Belgorod, both vital to Russia's military logistics and civilian energy supply. At Klintsy in the Bryansk region, one of the city's 110 kilovolt transformers at the local thermal power plant erupted into flames after being hit by what analysts identified as a Ukrainian kamikaze drone. Footage from Russian telegram channels showed massive fireballs rising into the night sky, lighting up the city like a scene from an apocalypse. But Belgorod, the symbolic and logistical heart of Russia's border defenses, suffered the most devastating hit. Ukrainian drones targeted the Luch thermal power plant, a 60-megawatt facility supplying over 36% of the city's heating, along with the main transformer substation that powered Belgorod's industrial zones, residential districts, and crucially military supply lines feeding the Kharkiv front. Eyewitness videos verified by OSINT investigators and confirmed through geolocation captured at least 5 separate precision strikes tearing through the facility. Explosions thundered across the city, shaking buildings miles away. The once steady hum of Belgorod's power grid collapsed into silence. More than 40,000 residents were instantly cut off from electricity. 24 towns and villages plunged into complete darkness. For the first time, over 1 million Russians found themselves trapped in chaos without light, water, or communication. On social media, panic spread faster than the flames. Telegram channels overflowed with unfiltered videos, people running through smoke-filled streets, cars honking in gridlocked intersections, families crying in stairwells as they tried to contact loved ones. These weren't distant war images from Donbass or Zaporizhzhia. This was Russia. Ordinary citizens now lived the nightmare once inflicted upon Ukraine. Experts from Deutsche Welle noted that the targets weren't chosen randomly. The Luch power plant was modernized in 2007, with General Electric turbines, a Western technology upgrade that made it both efficient and symbolically vulnerable. By destroying it, Ukraine sent a chilling message: no infrastructure supporting Russia's war effort is untouchable. The simultaneous strikes on both the transformer and thermal plant weren't merely tactical. They were strategic genius, a synchronized move designed to cripple the civilian grid and military supply lines at once. Railways carrying ammunition and convoys transporting fuel to the front suddenly froze. Within hours, Belgorod transformed from a functioning modern city into a ghostly landscape of flickering fires and terrified faces. The Kremlin's media machine tried to downplay the incident, labeling it a localized disruption. But the images circulating online told a different story, one of fear, confusion, and growing disbelief among Russian citizens. And as the night deepened, the people of Belgorod realized the unthinkable. The war they ignored had finally come home. When dawn finally broke over Belgorod, it revealed not a city awakening, but a city paralyzed. The skyline, once defined by the smoke of factories and the hum of daily life, now glowed faintly with the residue of fire. Entire districts lay in silence, their windows dark, their streets eerily empty. The sound that replaced the hum of electricity was the distant echo of sirens mingled with the confused murmur of people trying to understand what had just happened to their world. Within minutes after the strikes, the city's infrastructure collapsed like a house of cards. Traffic lights failed, plunging intersections into chaos. Vehicles jammed every major road, creating endless lines of unmoving cars as frustrated drivers honked into the void. Police sirens wailed, but their effectiveness was limited. They were as helpless as everyone else. Public transport stopped. Subway tunnels went dark. Ambulances struggled to reach hospitals that were now operating entirely on backup generators. In high-rise apartment blocks, hundreds of residents were trapped in elevators, their voices echoing behind metal doors. Social media was flooded with desperate calls for help, recordings of children crying, of elderly people gasping for air as the ventilation failed. Water pumps stopped working. At first, the taps sputtered and slowed, then they ran dry completely. Within hours, an entire city of 500,000 people was left without clean water or electricity. Shops closed their shutters. ATMs and card readers went dead. People formed long queues outside gas stations and bakeries that still had reserves. Those who managed to buy food paid in cash as electronic systems had failed across the city. "We haven't seen anything like this, not even during the 90s, one Belgorod resident wrote on Telegram, her voice trembling, in a video now viewed millions of times. Hospitals already stretched thin from the war's demands scrambled to run on emergency power. Doctors operated under flashlight beams with portable generators, powering only the most essential equipment. As Reuters reported, hospitals could only sustain these conditions for several hours before fuel ran out and resupply was uncertain. Even the city's digital lifeline collapsed. Internet and mobile networks went offline, leaving Belgorod isolated from the rest of the country. For the first time, Russians were cut off from the propaganda channels that had once given them a false sense of order. Instead, their reality was defined by darkness, uncertainty, and fear. NASA's firm satellite data later confirmed intense heat anomalies over the Luch transformer station, lasting for more than 6 hours. Scientifically verifying what residents had already captured on their phones, Belgorod was burning. By morning, the chaos had reached every layer of society. Schools closed, offices shut down, supermarkets rationed goods. On local forums, messages of panic spread like wildfire. Is this the end? Why isn't the army protecting us? Where is Putin? The war that Russia once viewed as distant now walked its streets, entered its kitchens, and haunted its nights. The same fear once forced upon Ukrainians now consumed Russians' fear of the next explosion, the next blackout, the next moment of silence before disaster. And as Belgorod struggled in darkness, one haunting realization echoed through every home: this was no longer Ukraine's war, this was Russia's reckoning. By the evening of October 5th, Belgorod was no longer just a city in blackout, it was a portrait of fear. Panic had turned into anger, and anger into disbelief. On Russian social media, citizens demanded answers. How could this happen? Where was the army? Why were civilians, not soldiers, paying the price for Moscow's war? Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov finally appeared on television, his face pale and exhausted, standing before a dimly lit backdrop. His trembling voice confirmed what millions already knew. The city is experiencing significant power outages. But it was his next sentence that stunned the entire nation. He warned that due to the blackout, there could be malfunctions in missile warning systems. In that single moment, Gladkov admitted what the Kremlin had tried to hide. The Russian state was no longer in control. Its most basic promise to protect its citizens from war had collapsed. The government could not even warn its people of the next incoming danger. For millions watching, it was more than a technical failure, it was a psychological earthquake. That statement shattered what political analysts call Putin's social contract with the Russian people, a deal forged over 2 decades. It was simple: give me loyalty and obedience, and I will give you stability and safety. But now stability had turned into chaos, and safety into illusion. Throughout the night, Belgorod's residents huddled in candlelight, scrolling through Telegram channels filled with footage of explosions and fires. The images were raw and real, no propaganda filter, no heroic music, no control. What they saw was their own helplessness reflected back at them. State media scrambled to regain control of the narrative, calling the attacks Ukrainian terrorism. Yet the people were no longer listening. Their trust had been burned away along with the transformers and turbines. Many began whispering what had once been unthinkable. If the government cannot defend Belgorod, what will it defend next? The panic spread beyond the city. In Kursk, Bryansk and Voronezh, rumors circulated that Ukraine would strike again. Some families packed their cars and fled deeper into Russia, forming long convoys on highways leading north. Petrol stations ran dry. Train stations overflowed with people carrying suitcases and children. As reported by Deutsche Welle and Al Jazeera, English-Russian telegram channels became chaotic echo chambers of fear and fury. Ordinary citizens demanded transparency, while local officials tried to calm them with empty reassurances. But the truth was impossible to hide. The war was no longer a distant geopolitical issue, it had entered the heart of Russian society. And in that darkness, a new emotion began to take root: doubt. Doubt in the invincibility of the Russian army. Doubt in the wisdom of the Kremlin. Doubt in Putin himself. Political scientists have long said that Russian stability depends not on prosperity, but on the illusion of control. On that night, that illusion vanished in a single flash of light above Belgorod. The once mighty Kremlin had lost more than transformers and turbines, it had lost the people's faith. And without faith, even the most powerful empire begins to crumble from within. Inside the Kremlin's heavily guarded walls, panic had begun to mirror the chaos spreading across Belgorod. The war Putin once dictated from a position of strength was now dictating him. Military advisors presented maps covered in red zones, not of Ukrainian territory but of Russian cities now within drone range. Belgorod, Bryansk, Kursk, even as far as Smolensk, all vulnerable. The president faced an impossible question. What should be protected first? The front lines, or the homeland? On paper, Russia still possessed some of the world's most advanced air defense systems, S-400s, S-300s, and Panzer S-1s. But these systems were spread thin across a vast territory. Every time one region was fortified, another was left exposed. As defense news analysts described, it was a blanket too short to cover both the head and the feet. If the Kremlin redeployed its prized S-400s from Crimea or from the Ukrainian front to protect border cities like Belgorod and Bryansk, it would open fatal gaps in its offensive lines. The Black Sea Fleet, already weakened by Ukrainian Neptune missile attacks, would lose its aerial protection. The Kerch Bridge, a vital supply artery to Crimea, could become an easy target. Every battery move to defend a city meant another frontline command post or ammunition depot left unguarded. But keeping those air defenses at the front meant leaving millions of Russian civilians exposed, a nightmare scenario for a regime built on the illusion of domestic stability. In both choices, Putin saw only loss. Ukraine, meanwhile, had turned this dilemma into a weapon of strategy. As reported by Reuters, its military command deliberately targeted energy and logistics hubs far from the front lines, forcing Moscow to stretch its resources to breaking point. Each strike made Russia weaker, slower, and more desperate. The Kremlin considered another option, striking the launch sites of Ukrainian drones and missiles. Yet that too was nearly impossible. Ukraine's tactics had evolved. Its HIMARS launchers operated from forests and farmlands, moving within minutes after firing. Small FPV drones could be launched from pickup trucks or hidden barns. Russia's intelligence capabilities, long criticized for rigidity and poor real-time response, simply couldn't keep up with this mobility. As one OSINT expert told DW, Russia is trying to hunt ghosts with billion-dollar missiles. Electronic warfare offered another theoretical solution, jamming GPS and communication links to confuse incoming drones. However, Ukraine's new generation of UAVs used inertial navigation systems and AI terrain mapping technologies immune to most jamming attempts. Worse, high-powered jammers often disrupted Russia's own aviation and communication networks, creating new layers of chaos. It was a deadly paradox. Every attempt to defend made the country weaker. Strategically, Putin found himself trapped in an unwinnable equation, a war of attrition fought not just with weapons, but with exhaustion, fear, and economic bleeding. The once feared Kremlin now chased shadows while its citizens shivered in the dark. And so for the first time since the invasion began, Russia's leader faced a truth even his propaganda machine could not disguise. The enemy was no longer at the border, it was inside the system itself. As Belgorod's skyline faded into black, a deeper battle was unfolding, one that no missile could stop. Ukraine's new doctrine had evolved beyond the battlefield. It wasn't just about territory anymore, it was about economic psychology and endurance. The war had become a war of systems, and Russia's was beginning to fail from within. The brilliance of Ukraine's retaliation was not in the number of drones it launched, but in the imbalance it created. Each Ukrainian drone cost roughly $35,000, built with a mix of domestic and Western-supplied technology. To counter just one, Russia often fired an air defense missile worth over $1 million. Each interception, successful or not, bled the Kremlin's treasury further. As Jane's Defense Weekly noted, Ukraine has turned Russia's vast geography from a strength into a weakness. With thousands of kilometers of energy, grids, refineries, and transformer stations scattered across the country, defending everything was impossible. Protecting one city meant leaving another open. In this vast chessboard, every Russian move only created new vulnerabilities. To shield these energy sites, Russia began pulling Panzer and S-400 systems away from the front, a move that delighted Ukrainian commanders. Every redeployed defense battery meant fewer shields over Crimea, fewer interceptors, protecting supply lines, and more opportunities for Ukraine's long-range strikes. As one Western analyst told Reuters, Ukraine is not just winning battles, it is reshaping Russia's war economy one explosion at a time. The cost was staggering. Ukraine's waves of low-cost drones had inflicted hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure damage, while forcing Russia to waste missiles, divert logistics, and burn through its limited stock of Western-made components under sanctions. The irony was brutal. The same energy empire that once sought to freeze Ukraine now faced the risk of freezing itself. Inside Moscow, whispers of panic began to circulate. Industrial giants feared shutdowns. Regional governors reported record shortages of fuel for generators and heating. Russian telegram channels filled with grim humor. We wanted to turn off Ukraine's lights. Now we can't turn on our own. The psychological toll was even greater. Citizens who once cheered for the special military operation now feared its consequences. power cuts in Belgorod, Bryansk and Kursk weren't just technical failures, they were symbolic breakdowns of confidence. Each blackout reminded people that the Kremlin's promise of safety was an illusion. Meanwhile, the West saw a shift in the war's momentum. Instead of backing down NATO and the EU increased military support for Kiev, convinced that Russia's economic exhaustion was finally setting in. According to Al Jazeera, English new Western aid packages focused on drone production, long-range artillery and intelligence sharing to maintain pressure deep inside Russian territory. By October's end, Ukraine had achieved something extraordinary. It had transformed energy warfare into strategic strangulation. Every Russian strike now triggered an equal and opposite response. The balance of fear had reversed. And so, as the fires in Belgorod dimmed and the city sank into cold silence, a haunting truth emerged. Putin's ultimate weapon energy had been turned against him. The same power he once used to dominate the region now threatened to choke his own nation. And for the millions of Russians trapped in that darkness, the war was no longer about geopolitics. It was about survival. The war that began as Russia's bid to freeze Ukraine has come full circle. What started as a campaign of dominance has become a crisis of collapse. In October 2025, Ukraine's precision strikes on Belgorod and Bryansk did more than destroy power plants. They exposed the vulnerabilities of an empire built on arrogance and propaganda. For years, Putin's regime promised stability in exchange for loyalty. But when the lights went out in Russian cities, that social contract disintegrated. The once mighty Kremlin could not even protect its own citizens, let alone its image of strength. The drone war forced Russia into an impossible equation: defend its people or its army, but not both. Economically, Ukraine's asymmetric strategy proved devastating. With drones costing a fraction of Russia's missiles, Kyiv drained Moscow's finances while inflicting billions in infrastructure losses. Strategically, it transformed the war into a test of endurance, one Russia was no longer guaranteed to win. Psychologically, the damage ran even deeper. Fear, once a weapon of the Kremlin, now infected its own people. Telegram feeds filled with panic, not propaganda. Trust in state power fractured. The Russian population, once distant from the battlefield, now faced it at their doorstep. As Western support for Ukraine grows and Russia's economy staggers, one truth becomes clear: this is no longer Ukraine's struggle for survival. It is Russia's reckoning with reality. The winter Putin once weaponized has turned against him. And in the cold silence of Belgorod's blackout, the world witnessed the beginning of the Kremlin's unraveling.